This podcast is produced by The Brand is Female.
Always with me.
Tanse, hello, and welcome back to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I am your host, Shayla Olette Stonechild, and I'm very honored and humbled to have this conversation with Korina Emmerich. She is the designer and artist and founder of the small, slow fashion clothing line called EMME, which is based in occupied territories of Lenape-Hoking, also known as New York City. She is from the Coast Salish Territory, the Puyallup tribe on her father's side, and she has a strong focus on social and climate justice, and she speaks out frequently about industry responsibility and accountability. She works actively to expose and dismantle systems of oppression and challenge colonial ways of thinking. So she also is on the board of directors for the Slow Factory Foundation and is a speaker and a panelist at sustainable events and global conferences discussing slow fashion, sustainability, dismantling white supremacy, environmental racism, sovereignty, climate and social justice, and combating systemic racism. And I feel like this conversation is very needed, not only for the collective, but it was also very needed for myself. I've been curious to know ways that I can actually create change through the daily actions within my own purchases and who I'm supporting when it comes to designers and in the fashion industry. So I'm very excited to have this episode, and I hope you enjoy it. This week's episode of Matriarch Movement is brought to you by our partners at Louvre Design. Louvre is a socially responsible fashion retailer and manufacturer specializing in sustainable women's clothing, with all pieces made and designed right here in Canada. You know, I support women like it's my day job, and Louvre is 100% female-owned and female-led, which is an A+ in my books. Finding sustainable clothing that doesn't break the bank is literally not easy, but Louvre has set out to change that. Even better, you can be sure that everyone Louvre works with are getting fair wages, and we know how important it is to bridge the gender wage gap. All the clothing is as comfortable as your yoga gear, but chic enough to wear on your next Zoom call, with modern staples and playful prints that you'll literally want to wear every single day. Check out Louvre for yourself at louvredesign.com. That's LOUVE design.com, and get free shipping on your next order with the code SHAYLAShipping, all one word, at checkout. Thank you so much for being here today. And if you want to just introduce yourself, anything that I may not have mentioned.
So Haslahil, Tual Gualapu, Daishad, Desayaya, Chalap, Korina Emmerich Tzitstat, Spoyala Papschad, Aslasleo, Chad Alta Lenape Hoking. I am Puyallup and white, and I actually live now in Brooklyn, New York on occupied Canarsie territories, which is in greater Lenape Hoking. And I've been a guest here on this territory now for about 12 years, which is wild to think about, because I'm almost heading into, I'm 35, turning 36, so I'm almost heading into this being the longest place that I've lived, which is really weird. And my dad tells me every day it's time to come home. But anyways.
Yeah, so where did you actually grow up?
Yeah, so I actually grew up in Oregon. My whole family's from like Pierce County, Washington on my father's side. So my father's Native and my mother is white. So I grew up in Oregon and went to college in Portland, Oregon, and then moved here.
So what did you take in college? Did you go to like fashion school, or how did that happen?
Yeah, I went to the Art Institute in Portland, which is no longer an institution, so I want my money back. No, but art school is an interesting thing. I think once I got older and decided that I was going to stop doing things the way that I was told and doing them the way that I wanted to, is when I really kind of started taking off and believing in myself. Yeah.
And so has your vision always been to be in the fashion industry, or was that something just that you were inspired by through art school?
Yeah, my dad was actually an art teacher when I was growing up. And so in the summers I would spend with him, and he would trick us into learning about art by doing all these fun projects and stuff. And so we would make art all the time. I mean, our whole family was creative. My mom loves writing. My stepmom was an incredible artist as well, a literature and drama teacher. So it's always been a big part of my upbringing to be involved in the art world. And clothing is something that I always really resonated with. I think when I was young, I was so obsessed with like how I presented myself in the way that I dressed. And I always knew I wanted to be a clothing designer, probably from the time I was like in 8th grade. And it's funny because I say, I knew I wanted to be an artist, and then my child brain was like, oh, how can you make money doing that? And I was like, oh, I'll be a fashion designer, because I looked at these magazines, and little did I know it's not the best path to be financially stable. But we're getting there.
That is amazing. I mean, for me, to like keep a vision ever since you were 8. Did you say you were 8 years old?
Like in 8th grade. Yeah.
Eighth grade.
Yeah.
8th grade. Yeah. Because for me, like, I had no idea what I wanted to do when I was in 8th grade. Like, I knew I wanted to be an artist, but I didn't know how that was actually going to present itself. What was your experience like being in art school?
It was really interesting. And I think my mom and I just had this conversation the other day. I never understood why people would skip class. And I would say it was like throwing money away in the trash can, because it was such a privilege for me to be able to go to school. And I was the first one to get a degree in my family, out of me and my sisters, I guess. So, my dad went back to get his master's degree, and became a counselor. Education was always something that was really important to us. So in that aspect, it was really nice, but I would get in trouble a lot because I pushed the boundaries a lot. And I think I've been doing that ever since. So many people continually tell me, you should be less political, you'll be more successful. And I can't unmarry those parts of me. And that is now, which is so interesting, in what felt like a decades-long failure of my work and what I was doing, now has put me at the forefront of a lot of the conversations that are finally being had within the fashion industry. So I'm so grateful for my conviction to stay true to myself and to stay authentic.
That was going to be my other question, is like, how do you remain rooted when I feel like the fashion industry for a long time, I just didn't feel connected to it at all, because I didn't feel represented in any of the designs, in any of the campaigns. And so how did you remain rooted to, your identity as an Indigenous woman when you were going through fashion school?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird conversation, because when I was young, my idols were like Alexander McQueen and Vivienne Westwood, and I really looked up to these, British designers, English designers, and because that's kind of where there was power, where there was pull, and you didn't really see. I didn't see Indigenous designers when I was young. I mean, like, maybe we would see, in Native American Arts magazine, maybe would see Dorothy Grant every once in a while, but I really wanted to be like this high fashion designer, and it just wasn't available. And I think that so much of the art that is celebrated, that's done by Indigenous people, is really, really rooted in tradition, which is so awesome. But it's difficult to see yourself then existing and taking that into the modern world. And I distinctly remember this one conversation. I was like nearing the end of my schooling, and my dad said, oh, like, why don't you ever use Pendleton fabrics? You grew up with it. It's from Oregon, and we had it all, Pendleton blankets all over our house. We won from like powwow raffles or like gifting. And like, even when I graduated high school, I was gifted a Pendleton blanket. And so it was like a part of, just our upbringing. But I was like, no, Dad, like, I don't want to be like a native designer, like, I want to be a designer who just like happens to be native. And so now it's really interesting that these fabrics have now sort of become a cornerstone of my work. And in a way, I say people, it's a conversation to have because Pendleton is not an Indigenous owned brand. But a lot of what I've talked about is that it, in a sense, it's a way of the reclamation of using those fabrics that are inspired by our traditional work, because so many brands who are not native are using those fabrics and patterns that are representative of us. And it still is something that's such a strong, like, pan-Indigenous cultural indicator that we use, and that is gifted and it's used in ceremony. And so my use of it, I see it as a form of reclamation, of saying, like, I have history rooted in this. This Pendleton is where I'm from. This, you know, the Northwest. It's inspired by tribes, so many tribes, you know.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm yeah.
that when I first found out that Pendleton wasn't like represented, like there's no Indigenous people behind Pendleton, I was shocked. I was like, I spent some time even supporting that. And so for listeners out there, you know, what is the fine line of how would you even know something is like maybe cultural appropriation, and then there's that fine line of like appreciating Indigenous fashion and culture. And so, yeah, I guess like how do you appreciate someone's designs but not appropriate them?
Yeah, this conversation is so incredibly nuanced, you know. We can talk
Totally.
about it for forever. I mean, like, there's some things that are just such like vapid cultural appropriation to the point where it makes me sick to my stomach. And we see it a lot from people and companies who are really disconnected from like North America, right? Like where we are. So appropriation is a huge issue. And this is where the conversation of like representation and visibility becomes so important. And we talk a lot, like me and my friends and other people who are designers, about how the use of like social media and the internet in a way has kind of evened the playing field, because we've been able to amplify our voices, not only as designers, as actual Indigenous designers, but to see something and say, this isn't okay, this is wrong, and this is why. And like within our own communities and our own protocols, there's just so much respect that has to be given to one another when we go about making art. And I was taught when I was young, you know, you do not copy somebody else's work, be it in form line or whatever. And it said, like, if you copy somebody, you steal from somebody, you're stealing a part of their soul. So I really do believe that. But at the same time, like, for example, using Pendleton fabrics, we bring it into like a commerce mentality. I would never sell something that's like traditional work for capital gain. So that's another thing, is like, I can use these materials that are inspired by Indigenous prints, patterns, artwork, and sell them to all people, because there's no specific meaning. But again, it is that reclamation of taking those materials and that what's inspired by, that is widely used in Indigenous communities, and being an Indigenous designer and using them.
Yeah, I think this is like such an important conversation to be having right now, because as you know, living in a modern day society, but being staying rooted to our own identity, I even toy with that, is like, okay, if I, you know, make this piece of jewelry, is that exploiting, you know, the teachings or the knowledge that I grew up with and gaining capital off of that teaching? So there's such a fine line, and you're right, it is like completely like nuanced. And that's why I think for a long time I was just so in a fear mindset of, you know, am I going to, you know, piss off the native people? Am I gonna piss off the, like, what, who am I not going to, like, I want to make sure that I'm not creating more harm than good, I guess. So I always am very mindful of, you know, what does this art represent to me, but is there other things attached to it? And so for you, living in New York, I don't know anything about the fashion industry out there. How has it been for you as an Indigenous woman to be mindful of these protocols and these practices, but also in such like a vast scene like New York?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my work a lot of the work I do within the fashion industry is fighting against the fashion industry. And that's been since I was young, you know, and I think about a lot of the practices in production that are just so detrimental to nature, that fashion is really an industry of exploitation. It's an industry of extraction, you know, vapid consumerism, and so in that way, I almost have a hatred towards the industry I work in, but at the same time, I love clothing as an expression, and so it's been really interesting. But I think that the narrative is changing now as people are moving towards sustainable initiatives, and it's not just becoming something that's like a small little label is doing it. It's like, no, these are initiatives that have to be implemented in order for us to move forward as a society as a whole. And yeah, so like that work is the most important aspect. Yeah.
Thank you, hi to our friends at Louvre Design for supporting this episode. As a yoga teacher and a spiritual revolution activist, my whole being is rooted in wellness, but not just of the body and spirit. Protecting Indigenous culture means protecting the land we belong to. The fashion industry is one of the most important sources of waste on our planet, but Louvre has set out to prove that sustainable fashion can be the norm. Protecting the planet, the people, and the animals are values most important to Louvre, and I stand firmly behind them. 25% of the pieces are actually made with upcycled fabrics, and the remainder of the fabrics are made with renewable materials like organic cotton, bamboo, modal, and tencel. This is the comfy modern brand you can be proud to wear. Don't forget to visit louvedesign.com, that's L-O-U-V-E design.com, and get free shipping on your next order with the code ShaylaShipping, all one word, at checkout. I feel like there is a shift even on social media right now where there is a lot more talk about sustainability and sustainable fashion. And the one thing I've noticed, though, is there is a lot of voices missing from these conversations. A lot of Indigenous voices are not in any of these marketing campaigns. They're not in any of these discussions around sustainability. And so for you, how do you get invited often to speak about sustainability, or what is that within, I don't know, the fashion world? Do you feel like they are being as accountable and as sustainable as they market themselves to be?
You know, this is a difficult conversation because I have so many feelings being an Indigenous person in sustainability fields. One where I will ask for calls to action from people who are fighting for climate justice, and I get a head tilt and a thank you, you know? And it's like, I wasn't saying it for your approval. I'm saying it because I actually want you to recognize that sustainability is an inherently Indigenous concept. And like right now, one of the most common buzzwords in sustainability is circularity. We had circularity since time immemorial. We didn't have to have a name for it, right? Like we're so cautious and aware of how we are a part of the world that we live in, right? We don't just walk on it. And that's one thing I've been taught too, is like there is no border between where my body ends and the natural world begins. And I feel that suffocation living in a place like New York because I am so far from my home. And, you know, that makes me sad. That does make me sad. But yeah, it's just like, it's really frustrating because we talk so much about representation and visibility, and there comes a point where it does turn into tokenism. And I feel that a lot. And I feel that in questions that when people reach out, reporters reach out to ask me questions, you know, how are Indigenous people at the forefront of sustainability? What is the solution? And the solution is real simple. It's 2 words. It's land back, right? That's the solution of how we can become more sustainable as a society, is give the land back to the original stewards and stop having these people come up and speaking on these panels who are not Indigenous, using our traditional concepts like they're a new idea. They're not a new idea. They've been shut down by industry. They've been pushed aside. I mean, we see it happening right now, you know? And people think, oh, you know, circularity is so cool. We got to do this. It's like, well, why the heck haven't you been listening to us? You
Literally,
know?
like all these, even in the wellness industry, like all these concepts and all these teachings, I'm like, do you not understand? Like, that's the medicine wheel. Like, this is like, this interconnectedness has been around since time immemorial, and you're now just talking about this. Like, I, yeah, I do feel like though okay, so I got TikTok and TikTok does a good job. There's actually the younger generation talking about how a lot of these practices have been appropriated from tribes across the world. So I feel like even the younger generation is kind of waking up to how how stuff has been stripped away from us and exploited and capitalized off of. So what are some you mentioned about tokenism, and I can definitely relate to feeling tokenized by brands and corporations. And so for you, is your intention moving forward in 2021 to work with more brands, or do you want to solely focus on your own brand and your own EMME Studios? What does that look like for you?
I feel like I've actively been taking a little bit of a step back from a lot of platforms that are offered. I'm really empathetic, so I feel a lot. I'm also like kind of a total introvert, which is surprising to some people. I spend the majority of my time at home. So I don't always love, you know, being a public facing person, but I am. Um, but I think like moving forward, I do really want to focus in the most important things that I do, which are not in the public eye, which is like reconnecting with my language. I'm taking language classes, and that's another thing. Like we touched on Indigenous futurisms, right? And it's like I can do that now on Zoom. Like I can go to like ribbon cutting ceremonies with my tribe on Zoom. I can do all these
True.
amazing things, but yeah, it is. It's yeah, it's hard. I really think like as a public facing person, there's so much emotional labor that goes into it that it becomes exhausting and tiring, and people don't understand that when we are seen sometimes solely as like trauma porn, it's like really detrimental to our mental health. And for me to continue to unpack all this emotional labor, um, and I don't only want to talk about Indigenous survival. I want to talk about joy and like what we're doing now and like what we're moving forward and like how important like the youth is and their knowledge and that we exist in the here and now. We're not just existing in a historical context. And yeah, so sometimes I think, you know, just focus on you, but we do have an obligation, responsibility to our community as well. And sometimes I think if I don't speak up, then maybe that voice won't be heard. And that's the hardest part, right? Is like you're too tired to say anything, but if you don't, then nobody will hear it.
No, I completely resonate with a lot of things you just mentioned. I'm actually an introvert myself and I spend a lot of time alone. Clairsentient, which is like I feel everything. So I need to like purify and cleanse my energy. And I do feel like exactly what you're saying. There's a lot of emotional labor. And also, I'm just tired of repeating the same history and the same trauma that's affected me and my family. I'm like, okay, why don't we balance this out with bringing up our success and our joys and what we like to celebrate and our traditions and our teachings too? Like, they're so powerful in that sense as well. And so there's been a lot of talk online about sustainability, and there's also been a lot of talk about decolonization. And so do you feel like when it comes to the fashion industry, is it even possible to decolonize your closet or to decolonize a fashion industry that has been so exploitive?
No, I don't. I'm going to say no. I don't think you can decolonize the fashion industry because it's a fashion industry, right? So people use this word, and it's a great word, right? But when we get into the use of semantics, it gets really complicated because we have like 3-second attention spans now, and it's really about creating this conversation. But decolonization at the end of the day is about land, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's about land. So you can't decolonize your clothing. You can't decolonize, like that's not what it's about. It's about land. It's about giving land back. It's about stopping, the exploitation of resources. It's about, I mean, it's about so many things, but it's not about using it as a marketing tactic in order to gain capital. In fact, that's the exact opposite of what decolonization is to stop gaining capital off of extraction of resources. So no, I think when people use decolonization in fashion, it's simply for a marketing tactic, which I find to be, just terrible.
Yeah, no, that's why I was super hesitant on using the word decolonize, because I felt like it just blew up, and then it really lost its meaning and its what it actually represents. I know you do a lot of work when it comes to, I believe you sit on the board of the Slow Factory, is that correct? How did you get involved with that? I've been following them on Instagram for a little bit, and they always post, really educational content. How did you get involved with the Slow Factory?
Yeah, I really owe a lot of my successes to incredible women and femme-identifying people, non-binary people who are in my community, and a friend, Marina, who is working at the UN. She's Tewa. Knew Celine Simon, who runs the Slow Factory, and recommended me to be on a panel that was actually in London. And I jumped on a call with Celine, who's Lebanese, and we had an incredible conversation. And she invited me to come sit on a panel in London, which was so crazy. I'd never been there before. I don't get to travel as much as I would love to, and it was an amazing opportunity. And I think that my voice and what I spoke to kind of rang out pretty loud there, because I as a person who is Indigenous or identifies as First Nation, and then talking to people in London, man, that was a really cool opportunity.
What was the panel about?
It was about, sustainability in fashion, and just how we what we do in our practices and whatever, and I just kind of, my goal is to always bring this Indigenous perspective to these conversations, which is something that wasn't really being had. But again, to say, these concepts are not new; they are inherently Indigenous concepts. Sustainability is an inherently Indigenous concept, and that respect needs to be given where it needs to be placed. So that was my first interaction with them, and they're incredible, thinkers, and we just continue to have these conversations, and they continue to reach out to me to jump on board for things. And so it's been 2 years now that I've been working with them. And then just this year, I think I've been sitting on the board. And it's an educational platform, which is something that's really important for me in my work, because I can't just make clothes, right? There's also an educational element into the work that I do, and the ethics and morals that I have, and that level of transparency that I believe in sharing with people.
What does your process look like when it comes to designing a piece of clothing?
I have a lot of different ideas. Sometimes I'm inspired by words. Sometimes I'm inspired by a mountain. Sometimes I'm inspired by music. More often than not, I'm inspired by music. Music is my number one most important thing in my life. That's really mine. And my dad played guitar when I was growing up, and we listen to music all the time at home. And so sometimes I'll sit and I'll hear a song, and I'll see the fashion show in my head. I'll see it walking down a runway, and I'll just it'll build itself, and before I even get down to a piece of paper, it's already built in my head. And so that's kind of my biggest way of creating. And then it's about getting it down to a tangible object, which I do with my own two hands, which I don't want to do. I don't love sewing. Actually, surprisingly enough, no, I don't love sewing. I don't enjoy sewing, but it's a means to an end, right? It's how I get the ideas out of my brain.
Yeah, totally. All your pieces are super beautiful. How do you maintain, sustainability within your own fashion line and within your own work?
Yeah, one of my goals is to only work with all natural materials, and that goes into like the biodegradation of something, the dyes that go into it, and the impact that they'll have on once they start breaking down, because it's not just about thinking about the creation of an object, it's also thinking about the end cycle, right? So the end of life cycle of it, and how it goes back into the earth. I have a poster behind me that says what you make goes into the earth as either food or poison. And I think about that a lot as I'm designing. So like right now we're moving into spring, and a lot of the materials I'm working with, I work a lot with wool. And I really try to talk about wool as something that's a multi-seasonal use, and people think about it often as something that can only be worn in the winter, but it's such a magical material, and it's really breathable, so it really is seasonless. And if you think about, you want to wear something that's all natural. As I get older, I'm more comfortable in natural fibers. My body feels more free and breathable, where if I have something on that's like polyester, like my body can feel that, and it's like I'm just always uncomfortable like pulling at my clothes. But anyway, so yeah, going to spring collection, we're doing spring wools. We're doing like cradle to cradle wools, which is, just talking about the production process of the garment, of the fabrics itself, not even before it turns into a garment. So just like the production practices of the fabrics and how ethical that is alone. Yeah, I don't know.
No, that's right.
Everything's made in-house. Everything's made to order. Yeah.
For people that are listening and want to create a more want to commit to creating a more sustainable life through fashion, what would your advice or tips be?
I'd say be cautious, because sustainability is not something that you can buy, right? And it's said that the most sustainable object in your wardrobe is the one that's already in your closet. And this is exactly why I'm a terrible business person, because I cannot market sustainability. Sustainability is a practice that I choose to implement into my business. It's not something that I can sell to you.
This past year, 2020, has been so hard and difficult on everyone, and also everyone's work. And so how was 2020 for you living in New York? I'm actually just genuinely curious, because New York kind of got like everything all at once. And what do you have moving forward coming into 2021?
Yeah, the last year was a really interesting, transformative year for me. I think in a way I feel a little bit of guilt, because I did pretty well. And I could have been pretty devastated as well. It's been a year now that I haven't been behind a bar, but I used to work nights at a bar just to supplement my income, because, my income is not very stable. And even working at a bar, I use that term stable very loosely. But in New York, you kind of have to do the hustle, right, to just survive. I used to say it costs $50 to cross the street here. But I have now not been behind a bar in over a year, and I am so grateful and thankful for that. And I feel it in my body. My health is so much better. My sleep schedule is so much better. And a lot of that was due to the fact that I had started making face masks before the pandemic even hit, which was really a strange kind of turn of events. So the face mask I had designed because it was right at the height of us doing wet Suidan protests, the wet Suidan and the coastal gas and pipeline protests. And so I was like, I had scrap material from a coat that I had made I was like, oh, I'll just make a face mask. That's a good idea. I took a picture of it, put it on Instagram. Everyone's like, I need one, I need one, I need one, I need one. I was like, all right, cool. I'll start making them. So I started making them, and then all of a sudden this pandemic hit, and this face mask took on a completely new life, and it was like selling out like crazy. And I'm sitting by just one person behind my sewing machine, like, oh my God. But I'm so grateful and thankful that I had another source of revenue during that time, because the thing is, like, in the past year, we have not only been surviving a pandemic, we're trying to survive capitalism during a pandemic. And that's where the hurt really comes in, right? Is that people and our resources and like what's available to us has been so difficult. And also living in New York, like I am very lucky that I have delivery, that I live in a resource heavy place where a lot of people don't have that. If I had gotten ill, if I'd fallen ill, I have a place to go, and a lot of people don't have that. So I think there's a little bit of guilt I feel in that, but a lot of gratitude as well.
I remember being on my couch one day, and I waited for your drop, and I didn't get one of those masks because they went like everyone was on them. They're buying them like instantly. Which was awesome to see, but I was like, dude, I'm just trying to get a mask over here in Canada. It's cold over here too. I know we kind of touched on this earlier in the conversation, but if you were to define Indigenous futurism, what does that look like to you?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, again, we talk about how indigenous people are so stuck in this historical context that sometimes I feel like we're fighting just to be seen here and now. But futurism is really, to me, it's about like autonomy and sovereignty. It's about visibility. It's about celebration and joy. God, I have so much hope when I see what the youth are doing. It's like, I'm so grateful for their work and their ability to see the bigger picture and really fight for something that's really meaningful, and and now that we have these incredible connections, albeit they are not always like the best, which is our social media. But even now, like you and I are about 3,000 miles apart, and we get to have a conversation face to face. That's pretty neat. And our chains of connection are unbreakable. I mean, you think about like our trade lines, we're so vast, and it's just it's the future of that, right? Of us getting to share.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to create Matriarch Movement, because I saw a lack of Indigenous women seen in like a positive way. I feel like the mainstream media always highlights Indigenous women from a state of vulnerability, from a state of lack, or not at all. And so when you hear the word matriarch, what does the word matriarch mean to you?
Yeah, matriarch is like, to me, it's like a moral power, It's really about love and care. It's, again, that ability to see the bigger picture, to see how everything is interconnected, to bring people together. I think about matriarchs in my life. Somebody who's been really important to me recently is a language director through my tribe, and she's been actively reaching out to people who are not connected on the land, like at this moment, just to check in with everyone. And I think that's like such a sign of a matriarch, is somebody who holds the community together, right there, the glue that makes sure that we're all doing okay, that we're all doing well. And seeing not just what's in your own view, but being able to see like everyone else and how everything is affected. And we talk about 7 generations in the future and actively preparing for that. Yeah.
How can people support you and your work? Support you and your work, all the work that you're doing with the Slow Factory, with your new line.
Yeah, I mean, you can buy my stuff. It's emmestudios.com, EMME Studios.com. And then, I also work within the collective that's based here in Lenape-Hoking called the Indigenous Kinship Collective. And we do a lot of work in mutual aid. And so you can go to at Indigenous Kinship Collective on Instagram, and that can link you to where you can donate. We have actively been redistributing funds during this whole pandemic, and so that's a lot of the work that I do. That's not always in the forefront. I mean, that takes up a lot of my time, which is the good work, right? That's the work that we want to be doing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time here today. And I'm super excited to see your next line drop. I'm going to have to turn on post notifications for your account so I don't miss out. Make sure you follow. I'll drop all your handles here as well. Thank you so much. And I'm inspired to see the rest of your work come out.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hoyaf Judd.
Hi.